everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of CSM Practice Podcast. This is 𝐇𝐈𝐆𝐇𝐋𝐈𝐆𝐇𝐓𝐒, your host, Chief Customer Officer and CEO of CSM Practice, where we provide coaching for tech executives and SaaS founders who wish to increase expansion, overall adopt customer success strategies so that you can get that expansion in revenues. And today I have a very special guest to talk about how do you get your customer success managers have an expansion over retention mindset? What does that mean? What kind of comp plans should you think about? What does it mean to the customer journey and milestones? Do you need a success plan for that? And what are some of the gotchas that you have to think about so that they don't turn into salespeople? And with that, I want to say hello to Justin Bradley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Arit.
What was your first experience in customer success?
I've been around in the industry long enough where customer success wasn't actually a function. I think the tenets of what we think about customer success today, being a trusted advisor, the voice of the customer, all those different things that we have modeled the customer success program around, those were things that we were doing in the field, but under different roles. So I go way back to 2004 when I started at CyberArk and had many different technical roles, but we would always implement those kind of philosophies in the support team, the professional services team, the SE team, et cetera. It eventually became the customer success team.
So clearly you specialize in B2B, cybersecurity, startups. Would you say that that's your soup du jour?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of themes that you can pull out of it if you're not in those specific industries, but that's mostly where I've spent my career, yes.
Right now you're actually consulting. Tell me a little bit, who do you specialize in and what do you help them with?
What I learned the long way around is I took a very long journey at my first company, CyberArk. I was there for about 15 years. When it was time for me to move on and I went to other startups, I realized that it's kind of a long journey to ramp up to that same kind of philosophy and program. So I had a good experience at my second company, Intezer, but I realized that it was kind of too soon in the process. What I understood is that startup cybersecurity companies would like to have a CSM practice that's very much aligned to the business, but sometimes it's too soon. So I found a nice niche and be able to consult with them at a very basic level to put some building blocks in place. So as they grew and as the company grew, they'd be able to consider those functions later on. I think we all realize that we don't want customer success bolted on at stage C, right? That doesn't make sense.
So there's a stage where customer success does not make sense. But when it does, you have a very concrete opinion around having a wide and flat CS organization structure. Tell me about that.
Specifically in the industry I'm in, usually the contacts and the technologies that I'm supporting are very technical, and therefore the champions and your contacts are very technical. So to me, having a lot of trust with your champion is super important. And you can obviously achieve those things in multiple ways, but in my industry, being a technical CSM makes a big difference. And part of that philosophy of having a wide and flat structure is you need to iterate very quickly and learn best practices from the field. So I found that if you have a very deep organizational structure with VPs and directors and managers and regions and leads, that it's very hard to get best practices from the field to another region. You have to go up and down the stack versus having everyone feel like they're all peers and you're sharing very fluidly. And obviously small startups have that culture. They don't have a lot of management structure yet. So what I always believe in is that your credibility to the customer is your ability to give advice and be a trusted advisor. And you're going to learn that from your own experiences, but other CSMs as well, who may be working in other regions and other use cases, but they're all very relatable. So that's why I always believe in that kind of a structure. I think it helps to facilitate best practices and knowledge sharing between peers.
Especially in technical
Exactly.
solutions where you need to implement it with super technical people.
Yeah, it's an ever-changing environment of new technologies popping up, different ways to do things, different compliances that get pushed out. So you want to be very holistic. And if you kind of think about the role of customer success, it's the customer is, let's say in this case, deploying or implementing a solution, maybe for the first time. You're kind of the spoke of the wheel where you should have all of this rich experience of how other customers have done it. Maybe you don't share the names of the customers, but you need to have a central location of knowledge that they can reference, and they know you're the expert of your own product. They're the expert of their own problems, and together you can find some good wins.
And all of this is with the intention of increasing adoption. What's your take on that in terms of best practices on achieving adoption in such a technical, ever changing environment?
It's evolved a lot over the years too. I think, especially in the technical space, I think that there's definitely a few trends. One is that most technical resources that you work with have multiple products that they support. Now, obviously, the bigger the company, the more specialized they are in certain smaller subsets of technologies. But for the most part, I always assume something like 4 to 8 types of technologies are supported by each different contact that we have. So if you think about that, that's 4 to 8 vendors that are trying to compete with your champion for time to talk about roadmap, best practices, adoption. It's not as easy as giving advice and hoping they accept your information and adopt the solution. You have to take 4 steps back and understand their business processes and challenges. Where do you fit in the stack? What are their competing solutions? And time management of your customer and your contact is the number one. So that is a huge part of the adoption cycle, is not just giving advice, but also being like a psychiatrist and understanding where are they spending their time, what's important to them, making sure that you're not wasting their time and finding critical times to step in and give advice.
You're a hard proponent around expansion over retention. What does that mean and how does it manifest itself?
It's a little controversial, but I think the first pillar that I like to think about when I think about expansion over retention is to set as high a bar as possible. And what I mean by that is, what is the ultimate end state of this customer? Maybe it's multiple years down the road of multiple iterations, but if we set a low bar, in my opinion, if I set a low bar in my industry of just retention and reducing churn, 100% churn, in my opinion, is very impossible to achieve. And at no fault of the CSM, it's just factors that happen. So I like to set as high a bar as possible and then try to put the CSM in the driver's seat to help to shepherd that customer through that journey. The idea is that these key metrics that we all measure ourselves against, retention scores, obviously the retention itself, net promoter scores, whatever we're looking at for different metrics, will be race conditions on the way to a higher goal. And usually it's expansion. If you are getting a customer to the point of expanding, they're at least happy enough to retain the product in almost every situation. So that's the kind of the way that I look at it. Set as high a bar as possible and put the emphasis on the CSM to walk them through that journey. And along the way, you'll have good things that happen.
Expansion over retention doesn't necessarily mean expansion of revenues, but certainly means expansion of the perceived value, long-term vision that the client has with you. How early should we set the bar as high as possible in the customer journey? When is the best time to actually have that conversation?
I think as early as possible. I mean, I think there's 2 factors. One is, does the actual company, the vendor, know the customer journey? That's a big factor. I believe that many of them think they do, but with a little bit of prudence, and this is kind of where some of my consulting comes in, you'll find anomalies and one-offs that you can't repeat. So once you've set your customer journey, I do think that as early as possible in the cycle makes sense. Now, from a customer's perspective, they don't want to hear about a journey the day after they just purchased the product. Right? They bought it for a very specific reason and they have a very specific goal and initiative. So it's probably not the best time to bring up where you're going to be in 5 years. But I think the idea is that from day one, at least on the internal side, the customer success side, you're setting expectations that, okay, your job is to get through these hurdles that have been established by the business process. They bought it for these reasons and these purposes in this time frame. Let's achieve that. But know that when that's done, you're not done. That's the beginning of your journey, and you want to be able to walk them through. And what I like about this kind of higher level goal that we can set for these individuals is you're helping to find creativity in the CSM. There's no rules of how to get from A to Z. So once you know that you need to get them through, you're going to try everything possible to be able to do that.
One, talk to the client after you achieved first value. Before that, they're not emotionally ready to think about 5 years out with you, but they're certainly ready to say, well, we purchased for this, prove your case, do a proof of value, show us that you can even do this little thing, then we can talk about something else. But you do hold the CSMs accountable to say, well, if you had to paint a picture for 5 years out for this client, even if you haven't talked to him about that yet, what would you recommend? What is your vision for that? And have them document it?
Yeah, I like the idea of the question, what do you want the customer to do? It's easy for somebody to say what the customer wants. That's very obvious. They want this problem fixed. They want to be here in 2 years. Like, I understand that, but that is what you're doing. If you think about it, is you're putting the customer in a position where they should be the experts of this journey. And it's not the case. Like, it's your product, your roadmap. Now you're aligning it to their problems in their journey. So there's obviously a collaboration. But if you are relying on the customer to tell you what's next, that's assuming they know what they're doing. And I think nobody admits it, but it's not the right way to think about it. So you want to align those two things, but it does have to start from a place of trust and success. And I think the opposite can happen if you're pitching roadmap and future state before you've achieved your first goals, then they can actually have the opposite effect, obviously.
Let's say I have 5 clients for each CSM, but I'm hiring more CSMs and they're brand new to us, to our company, the outcomes that we can achieve for customers. How do you educate new CSMs? Do you use a certain framework? Do you help create a consistent conversations with customers around the 5-year vision? How do you train new CSMs on building a 5-year outcome for or vision for clients?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you need to be able to preach what is successful and what works. So it's definitely a learning curve. I'm a big fan of a mentoring type system or a shadowing type system, where if I'm a CSM, I'm working with another experienced CSM and just seeing the basics of how it works. And it's less about the result and more about the process. We've all been in those meetings where you go into a boardroom, you're there for 3 hours, it's very productive. And then you probably have 5 hours of conversations after about what actually happened. This is why I said this. This is why we walked down this path. This is the reasoning here. That's what a good team lead, CSM manager, or whatever you want to call it, has, is they're not just teaching them do XYZ. It's the thought process of why we're doing these things and why we're navigating to it. And I think that's where the best leaders come from. So I'm a big fan of the mentoring system and allowing people to grow, but then also kicking them into the pool as fast as possible. The idea that you do only learn it when you're uncomfortable and put on the spot. So usually it's a few shadowing sessions, then it's more of a, hey, you're going to lead, but I'll jump in if you need me to, and then it's you can swim now. So let's figure it out from here. That's usually the best way. And the whole idea is it's a repeatable process, so you should be able to replicate it.
How do you hold CSMs accountable to actually coming up with a 5-year vision? And how do you audit review, make sure that that vision makes sense? What would you recommend a CS executive?
The whole idea of having a multi-year vision is to make sure it's aligned to the goals of the business. If customer success is a reactionary function, then it's always going to have a reactionary result, which is find a problem, fix a problem, et cetera. And you can never grow or get out of your own way. And this is where I see a lot of CSM burnout and all the things that we try to avoid. So to me, having alignment to the executive team of why do you want the customer to walk through this 5-year plan? It's probably based on revenue and customer acquisition and all these different metrics that help the business grow. So right from day one, you're cementing yourselves into being part of the team and taking your piece of it, which is I'm going to walk the customer through and educate them on what they should and shouldn't be doing. It doesn't mean I do everything. I mean, the sales team can still send a quote. We can still have SEs do demos of different products as needed. But I'm the shepherd of the customer through this journey. If the business's goal is let's just get customers and see what happens next, then I don't think we'd see the results that we would normally see. It's got to be longer than that, which is here's our best customer. This is the revenue they produce for us. If we apply that to 50% of our customers, we get this amount of revenue. These are numbers that don't even look real on paper. So a much lower bar, if you achieve it, has great impact to the business and to the results. So that's where I think the journey comes in. It's not necessarily setting expectations with management. It's aligning to where you want the business to be in 5 years, which is every customer adopts it at this level and has this amount of success and revenue that comes in.
Super fascinating stuff, Justin. And the reason I ask is because what I found is think that approach works well for startups, and I totally agree. If this was a much bigger company, I would say work on creating a list of outcomes that you want customer to achieve within 5 years based on their industry, based on their size, be a bit more prescriptive. This is the only way they can truly scale, especially when you talk about KPIs. One thing that I would recommend is pointing the path, creating a solidified way to say, hey, if this is the outcome, these are the core components that we recommend clients to adopt so that the success plan is not based on the CSM's hunch, but what we recommend as a company. So those are just some of the things that I've seen, as companies grow, we try to be a little bit more prescriptive. So this way, when a new CSM comes in, they have something that they can follow. And obviously, I totally agree with you. Mentorship, role play, absolutely critical. And the CS executive's role plays in setting up the strategy, setting up the templates, and training the team to make sure that we talk about the right outcomes and also validating that the 5-year vision that we have for each client makes sense from their perspective and experience.
I completely agree. I think when I was referencing the 5-year plan, it's based on KPIs. Like these are the milestones that they should hit for these reasons. But yeah, I agree
Oh,
100%.
To me, the way I interpreted it is they might implementing this one use case, but in 5 years from now, I would like them to implement these two or three additional use cases or buy into additional products or expand to additional locations. And then in terms of KPIs is, are we aligned with what are the value KPIs for the way that the client perceives value? Did we have that conversation with them once they said yes or okay to any one of these use cases? Are we aligned to what success means?
Yeah, makes sense.
You said that one of the responsibilities of the CSMs is to put the client through the customer journey. So let's say they have a big vision for them and we define a specific use case and we align specific KPIs for them. That's the part of the expansion motion. You said the CSM is responsible to shepherd the client through that journey. Tell me more about what does that mean in a very technical world? What are some of the core components you're expecting the CSMs to apply to make sure that the customer is successful in getting to those milestones?
It's another slippery slope topic of how much you should be engaged versus pulling in expertise in different teams that can be specialized in these types of things. So, what I always like to use the term of is I want the CSM to be as dangerous as possible, meaning they have to be credible enough to be able to answer basic questions, maybe help with very basic things on the spot, maybe even help with a quick support case. That's obviously not their goal, but what you're doing is I think we all suffer from especially in a large organization where you have specialists that do these things, but we're not emphasizing the customer's time. So it's things like, hey, how do you do this quick thing? Oh, you know what? Let's schedule a call for next week. And oh, they're busy. Like, can you do a week? The person just needs a quick answer. They don't need a deep dive. Now, they will eventually need a deep dive. So I think that the tasks that I would want to see a CSM in my industry be able to accomplish are basic explanation of integrations and how they work, but more importantly, why you want them to integrate together. What's the value proposition? Not necessarily like where do I click and how do I integrate. Every process, every model that I ever go through has three parts. One is what's possible, two is how do I do it, and three is doing it. And I think that a CSM can very easily accomplish the first one or two, where number three, you might want to pull in another team. So for example, I'm interested in this integration. Okay, let's talk about why you want that integration. Tell me about the business case. And that, again, we're relying on the customer model, the customer journey that we've set for the business, which is, okay, you're asking me a very common, oh yeah, it's very common. Everyone asks that. Here's why. Let's talk about you starting to do it. Or that's a one-off. I've never heard that request before. Can you explain why you want that? Because it's much more common that you, as Mr. Customer, might want to integrate in this way. That's what we would expect. But I'm interested to know why you're going down this path. So at first, the what's possible is the first piece. Then it's about how do I do it? What are the details? Do I need a team? Is there a cost? Is it free? Is it easy to use? And then the actual doing it, I think, is where the CSM steps back and says, okay, let's pull in a team to help you do that, or let's pull in a support person to help you do that. So if you boil it down to those functions, it's much less of that's a technical question, I can or can't answer it, to I'm just here to help you. I want you to adopt this product. I'm going to do everything under my power, but I know that I have to be able to take a step back and have an expert step in because they're going to be able to give you better service. The CSM has to be able to draw that line to what's helpful to what's probably slowing down the process a bit.
So essentially, the way that you paint the CSM role and this expansion over retention is not salesy. It's more being of a consultative role to paint a vision and then asking the right questions to get to the why and the what. And then when it gets to be super technical, making sure that they bring the right resources in so that we can propel change.
Exactly. We live in a world now where customers are pretty smart, and depending on the situation and the vendor, especially if the vendor has a large platform, you have to be very careful around helping them versus pitching them something that they should buy to fix their problem. Obviously, there's always something they should buy to fix their problem. So you have to be able to balance that. Sales is an outcome of this process. It just happens to be that if you walk them through the journey, they will buy more stuff. It's not your objective, but it's a great outcome, just like retention is. So I think that's the way to think about it is you're their best trusted advisor, and you want to be as almost like an employee of them, as agnostic as possible to, hey, here's how I would do it, or here's how other customers do it, because they don't have that information. Only you have that information. So if you can share the information, it's kind of your due diligence for them to get the most out of it. It doesn't mean they have to do it, by the way, but at least you're sharing what you would recommend and why.
Absolutely. So expansion over retention doesn't necessarily mean CSMs become salespeople, but rather consultative. Does that translate to the comp plan? instead of compensating them on upsells or net retention rate, you would use a different KPI as their performance metric?
I personally believe in the quota. Now, I
Mm.
believe in the quota more for the team building and the camaraderie that it brings. And obviously there's also potential financial gain there as well. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say compensation shouldn't motivate someone, but it can definitely distract them. And I think that's the way to think
Mm.
about it, which is you don't want someone to be thinking about how they make their next sale. It's more like if you follow these things, then you can benefit from it. A good quota is kind of like a company bonus that you have a very big impact into. It's not this huge global bonus that has nothing to do with you. It's you did these things, you helped the customer get to this point. We're going to thank you. We're going to pay you a little extra dollars because the outcome of that was them buying something additional.
Okay, so the quota is tied to what? The total contract value, the upsell that happened that quarter. Can you specify a bit have you seen work well?
It depends on the company and obviously ARR versus NRR. I like to use NRR because I think that also puts a additional responsibility on the customer to make up for churn, almost setting expectations from day one, which is you're not going to have 100% retention. So you're going to need this expansion motion at some point. So start building it now because you're going to need it maybe in 2 years or a year down the line. It's a long-term thinking of how can I get the customer there? And the idea around it is that you're thinking multiple years ahead because that's how long it takes a customer to adopt. And especially if you cast a wide net across many customers, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's more of a when it's going to happen. I've already educated and seeded all these customers. Oh, this one actually happens to be ready now. Great, let's go ahead and move forward with that. So I like to use an NRR metric. I think it helps to balance the two worlds. And the idea is don't focus on the retention part. You have to focus on the expansion part. Retention's important, but if you do this right, retention should be kind of an afterthought.
What have you seen worked best when quota is on net retention rate? Would you put a quota for each CSM on their entire book of business, or do they get a spiff or a quarterly bonus for specific quotas that they've got for that quota for a specific account? I want to remind everybody that's listening, we're talking in the world of startup. The contention is here is that we're talking about putting a quota, a variable on a comp plan for CSMs that work with anywhere between 1 to 20. And if the high touch model, because they're working with strategic accounts, if your engagement model is not super efficient, maybe you work with 35, but it's a few accounts and you should know everything. So, what have you seen work best when you have a high touch model, small startup? Do you put the quota on specific accounts that they think they can get an expansion on every quarter? Is that quota for their entire book of business, or is that quota for NRR for everybody on the team in general, and it's given once a year?
I would put it on the specific individual, but without guardrails of what it should be, meaning get to this number any way that you can. It could be one customer, it could be a little bit from every customer. And I think that fosters the same concept of creativity. And what I like about it too is multiple CSMs will have different strategies of what to do, and they can actually exchange notes on this worked better, this worked better. The other part of it too is I don't want to get into the forecasting model. I think forecasting is way too much in the sales realm where I have to now predict when things are going to happen. And the whole idea of this is I'm thinking about opening doors, not closing doors. I want to know that I've educated a customer on what to do and why to do it. I shouldn't actually care when it happens. If I do this enough, then it will kind of level out as an average. So the ramp up obviously is usually smaller, but then you create this pipeline of when things come in. Oh yeah, I worked on that 2 years ago and now it's starting to come in. Great. It's an opening and closing process. The analogy that I give is an inside sales team that's working on new logo acquisition doesn't care about when the logo closes. Typically, they're comped on that you got them to a certain part of the business stage. You got them to a demo, you got them to a POC, whatever it is. It should be the same thing for customers. The acquisition cost of a customer is so much less than a new logo, so it should even be that much easier. So I look at it as, did you do your job to open the door? And then just kind of like a company bonus, you're going to get compensated on the regional number or your specific number, just kind of like an SC would is probably the best analogy.
Obviously, every CSM would have their own bonus or quota. Would you pay it out quarterly or annually? What have you seen work best?
I like quarterly because it aligns to the sales team, even though it's not a sales function. It just makes the accounting easier. I like quarterly. I mean, yearly is better on paper, but I think when you're in January, it's hard to think about what's going to happen in November and you have such a long runway. I like the smaller chunks of time. So the way that I've done it in the past is you get paid per quarter And then you have a yearly bonus if you hit these numbers, like an escalator number that you can achieve. So there's the
Okay.
balance of the long-term vision, but you're getting the short-term reward.
Is the quota dollar related based on your book of business? Or is it, okay, you need to get to 110% NRR, for example?
I'd say the latter. Again, getting to that number is the metric that the business is going to use to go and get new VC funding, or to go to the board, or to go to their investors at the quarterly meetings to say, these are our numbers from our customers. So it should align to those metrics. But usually it's something to the effect of a quarterly NRR number.
Okay, so you would give each CSM a quarterly NRR rate, not necessarily a dollar amount, and say, okay, let's think about how can we get to that goal given your book of business.
Yeah, obviously it's hugely dependent on the customers you have and their current ARR number, their current retention number. So that's a factor. But overall, I'd say the idea is, what is our current customer at, current customer ARR of customers you're working with? It could be 5, it could be 50, right? Whatever the number is. And this is what we want you to get to somehow, some way. It could be in any way that you find that is creative. It could be one product, 10 products, one customer, every customer. It's up to you. But the idea is to get to this goal, which is a number that can be touted by the business.
Yeah, essentially telling the CSM, hey, you own your book of business. It needs to get to 120, 160. You said you yourself achieved 160% NRR in your book of business. So it's totally possible. My question is like when you do it quarterly, almost putting pressure on the CSM to sell something to someone every single quarter. And like you said, some of these really large companies, they don't make a decision very well. It might even take a year or two before from the time you paint the vision to the time they actually get to actualize the value and buy into that vision and be able to pull the trigger. If I only have a very small number of accounts, let's say 10, would be quarter over quarter when I don't achieve NRR goal. Do you find that sometimes might be frustrating for CSMs?
I think that it is, but at the same time, I'm not sure that it's a proper, just like in sales, I don't think it's always a proper reflection. So it's more the KPIs that they're hitting along the way. And I think that every salesperson, if you ever talk to them, they say the same thing. Oh, I just started in the company. I'm ramping up my business. I know I'm doing these activities with customers. I know it'll translate to business. And a good sales management team will see that and say, hey, I know you're only at 30% of your number this quarter, but I'm seeing the good activity that's leading you along the way to where you should be. And it's around a framework that's been set. I think the same thing exists with customers. It's less about predicting and more about doing the day-to-day things that you know will grow the business. And remember, this is built on success. It's not just sitting in a room figuring out something that could or couldn't work. It's actually proven to work. So if you follow these steps, you should be able to hit your goal and your quota. Now, the tricky part of being tied to anything sales is there's variables you can't control. The economy goes down or people get laid off. Those are things that you have no control around. But the idea is to have enough of a pipeline of building trust with customers that it's okay if one slips because the next one will take its place and vice versa. So usually this is the best model if you have a larger, again, for startups, you have a much larger number of customers to your name versus one or two where it's feast or famine. That's probably less of a model in those scenarios.
One of my key takeaways, and I think it's a really important point that you keep driving, is that we need to align whatever the CSM's goals are to the business goals, to the KPIs, to the NRR that the business is trying to achieve to get the next funding. And these critical early days, it's very, very important to articulate it to the CSMs. And I also like how you said, you know what, we need to also keep watch of leading indicators that would say, yeah, we're probably going to hit those numbers. The CSM is doing the right things. And that's why you tie in the quarterly quota for NRR with an annual bonus and probably the team performance reviews. So you mentioned one KPI, which is the NPS score. What other KPIs would you recommend in this expansion over retention type of mindset for the CS leader to adopt to make sure that the team is doing the right things to progress towards a higher net retention rate?
The KPIs that I most focus on are the milestones in the customer journey. Those are probably the most best indicators. We all live in a world now where customer success is a very mature function. Everyone knows what they're dealing with. And you can have good KPIs and not have a positive outcome. People get in the call, they yes, 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 everything is great, I'm happy, and then they churn. If a customer walks through this journey, then they will be happy and not the other way around. They're not happy because they walk through the journey. So I'm trying to extrapolate out more of the processes and the steps along the journey within a reasonable time frame. Those are the KPIs or milestones that I would kind of more measure against.
In your world, talk about customer journeys and milestones. Do all customers walk through the same journey and same milestones, or are those something that the CSM crafts up based on the 5-year vision?
To a certain extent, they walk through certain journeys, and that's a reflection of what the technology is designed to do and the problems that a certain business has. So, for example, a large bank and every large bank and every large insurance company should walk through about the same journey, roughly. Obviously, there's nuances to it. Globally, there's different nuances you have to consider. It's not a one size fits all, but there's roughly a journey of A, B, C, D to
Can you
walk
give me
through.
examples to just make it concrete?
So my past company is in privilege account management, which is the idea of managing passwords. Fine, there's lots of passwords out there. Every company has a different starting point. However, there are certain high risk credentials that exist in every business, and different credentials exist in different businesses to a certain extent. So, for example, a bank has a certain subset of credentials that are super important to them, which maybe in a law firm they don't care about. So, the journey in this example is to walk the customer through multiple use cases, highlighting the risk of each different credential in this example and educating them on why this is a more important one than the other. Because the problem in these large enterprises is there's so many teams involved and so many decisions to be made and so many technologies in place that if you ask 10 businesses how they're going to do it, they're going to give you 10 different answers. So what you're trying to do is align those two things together.
Having a discovery call is one milestone. What's the second milestone? Sounds like more of an activity, honestly, than a milestone.
I think the way to think about it, especially in the technology space, is it's hard to get a customer to do something that they didn't intend to do previously. If they came and said, I want to do these two use cases, then great, you do the two use cases, everyone's happy. But what we're pivoting to is the idea of educating them and empowering them to do something that they had not planned on doing. They didn't budget for it, they didn't put resources aside, they didn't even think about it. And you're trying to find a creative way to get to that point where you're now empowering them to do something and grow the product and align at many different levels.
So that's one activity that you're hoping that CSM would do. And as a CS executive, you can hold them accountable. Have you had that conversation? Yes or no? And then over a 5-year journey, what kind of milestones do you hope the customer would go through to say, yes, you're in a healthy state and we're on an expansion over retention type of mindset with this customer? Is it additional use cases?
It's usually groups of use cases, but you do want to take a step back and try to incorporate other people into the team, executives into the team. So it's usually quarterly reviews, yearly reviews, QBRs, whatever you call them. These are great opportunities to give a customer where they are in the journey. But I'm a big fan of also comparing them to their peers. Now, obviously, you don't share the names, but the psychological experiment of, hey, you're doing great here, you're behind your peers in this aspect. And that's another kind of, again, psychological way to get them to understand that there's more they can and should be doing. Because I think we live in a world, especially in my space of technology and cybersecurity, it's not about owning more products. It's about getting more out of the products you own. And I think this is what it represents as customers and especially CISOs who are kind of owning these decisions. They want to show the board, hey, I bought this thing for this one problem. It's solving 3 other problems for me. And they're helping me do that. I mean, that's a strong message that builds a lot of trust over a long period of time.
If you're a CS executive working in a fairly small company or even large one, honestly, the same rules apply. Very technical, high changing environment. You need to arm and hold your CSMs accountable to have an expansion mindset over retention. And that means that they always have a longer vision for the client. They should know what they would recommend the client. Have those conversations either in discovery calls or QBRs. Track to see, is the customer expanding from the initial use case, and if not, how long has it been since they adopted a new one or a new product or a new feature, a new module, a new site. Then align the comp plans to owning expansion and see that the lagging indicators such as net retention rate is actually meeting the goals, and that the CSM goals for net retention rate is aligned with the company, the startup's goals, so that you can get the funding that you need. Did I miss anything?
No, that was excellent. And the last thing I'll say is that this is obviously a very positive playbook to be able to empower CSMs, align them to the business, and have success. I mean, we probably all agree that that's everyone's goal. One of the ancillary benefits as well is what you're also doing is we live in a world where venture capital and funding these cybersecurity is not as easy as it was. You're no longer selling the dream, you're selling an actual business plan. Like you're going to a bank and saying, this is how I'm going to get there. This is the money that I'm going to be able to need to get to this point. And this is a very strong pillar of one of those, which is this is how I'm going to expand my customers specifically. And this is the teams that are going to do it and what we expect as an outcome. It's not hey, it's great technology. If people buy it, they'll use it. We don't live in that world anymore. The world has changed in that regards as well.
Do you have like a book that you can recommend anybody that's listening that you may have read in the last couple of years and totally think it would benefit anybody's listening?
On the CSM front, a good podcast, Trust Me, a CSM, some people I used to work with, I run that. From a book's perspective, the Challenger Sale is excellent. It's a sales book, I think, is represent what I just discussed, which is I'm the expert. I'm trying to help you understand what we're talking about and challenge you when you say you don't want to do this or do that. Collaborative as a peer and less taking orders and just reacting to whatever the customer wants. So the Challenger Sale is an excellent book. I'd recommend it for non-sales professionals. And additionally, from a personal's perspective, if anybody is into sports books, Born to Run is an excellent book. I don't know if anybody knows about it. It's about ultra marathon running and it gets into a whole story, but it's considered one of the best sports books of all time. So Born to Run is a really excellent book as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to include all the links in the description to this episode. All right, everyone. If you enjoyed this conversation, give it a like, subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. Check our website out for more resources. And if you need help in implementing a better expansion model or upsell strategies, check out our new startup program for coaching technology executives on how to do better land and expand and reach 120% NRR at scale. I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you so much for listening in. And with that, peace out.